Welcome to Sopra Steria Insights. On this podcast, we highlight transformative technology solutions that shape our world for the better. We conclude our focus on AI today, for now at least, with a deep dive into ethics. At Sopra Steria, we are passionate about innovation with purpose, and our team of digital ethics specialists ensure that doing the right thing is hardwired into any solution we develop for our customers. Head of Digital Ethics at Sopra Steria, Nick Wild, and Simon Baxter, Principal Analyst at TechMarketView, are with me today to unpick this topic. Welcome to you both. So, Nick, AI. It has huge potential for organizations, but there is a health warning with it, isn't there?
Definitely. We see lots of ethical issues with the use of AI these days. And I would say the biggest one is bias in decision making. So that's when that's what happens when we don't understand the solution that the AI proposes or gives, because there's a lack of transparency and accountability in the AI. This is better known as the black box problem, and it comes from just putting lots of data in and getting a solution out and not understanding how the AI has made that decision. So this bias can lead to discrimination against certain types of demographics, which we obviously do not want in society and can be illegal. There are also other things like the risk of job displacement, but another thing as well that I believe isn't really spoken about that much, but is becoming an ever increasing problem or issue to be aware of, at least, is the sustainability impact of AI. AI uses a lot of energy and a lot of data, and that is something that isn't often tracked in decision making around AI by organizations, and something that I think should start to be.
Okay, so some pretty serious considerations there, Nick, to be taken into account. And Simon, from your view as an analyst, are you seeing these ethical concerns across the market?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's been, I'd say, a really high focus around, um, both AI ethics and kind of AI governance as well, which kind of, very kind of closely related. I think, we've seen a lot of organizations starting to hire more, ethicists, AI ethicists, and starting to bring those people into their organization. We've seen them relying on third parties as well to help advise on how they should, implement and what they should implement in a kind of an ethical and a sustainable way. And I think it's a very big topic for organizations to grapple with. It's not a case of necessarily always what what we should do with AI, but it's whether we should do it. Should we implement AI in certain use cases in certain industries? What is going to be the impact on consumers, on businesses, on society as a whole? Some really big, meaty topics that I think a lot of people are grappling with. And I think just touching on Nick's point about bias, I mean, certainly in some of the early days of the LM development, it was a big issue, right? We saw lots of really great examples of how AI doesn't work very well. Amazon, for example, had to scrap its, was it like secret AI recruiting tool that was showing bias against women. We saw Google models being, very profane in their language and how they communicate with people. I think what's happened though over the past 12 months is, as organizations have been really refining their development AIs, they've been doing a lot more testing, a lot more development. It has gotten a lot better. So you can now, as long as you implement AI correctly, I wouldn't say you can completely remove bias, because again, it really depends on the situation and the data, but you can do a much, much better job than some of those early LLM models when you get down to a really specific kind of use case level.
And it really does feel, Simon, like a maturity thing in terms of everyone has been chasing the latest exciting technology, and there's almost a maturing of understanding of what the potential risks and downsides to that may be. And as we talked about in some of the other podcasts in this series, it really is a little bit perhaps of going back to the basics of what we've seen in other waves of disruption within this industry. And Nick, to you, I mean, it feels like there's a real need for transparency and accountability here to be at the center of what we do with AI. how do you think we can ensure that and assure the public around the transparency and accountability?
Well, I think first of all, I just double down on that point around the need for transparency and how it comes about, because as you were just saying, Simon and Tom, the rapid pace of AI innovation outpaces the development of regulations, and therefore I think you need that transparency, and you need those ethicists in those roles to really make sure that that rapid pace of development and innovation doesn't become unethical. So to then answer the specifics around how can we ensure AI systems are transparent and accountable, they should be designed, or AI systems should be designed with a clear and interpretable decision-making process. Developers and companies should start to document the purpose of, the training for, and the evaluation of the AI systems. So going back to that black box problem I spoke about earlier, you should be able to articulate to someone else how the AI has come to that decision making, and that comes through the AI being designed in a clear, interpretable way. AI systems as well, I believe, should be audited on a regular basis, both by internal teams and also externally, to ensure that the data that is being used is fair, is representative, also to make sure that there is enough transparency in how that data is used. I also think on the going one point further on the transparency note, just releasing the way in which the AI is used to stakeholders, being transparent, is not the same as making it understandable. So just because someone who's very technical can see how the AI has made its decision making, other stakeholders may need other forms of language to really digest and understand the information. And that is the key part of how to make AI transparent as well, is by making it explainable to or understandable to all stakeholders that are involved in the process.
Yeah, so that transparency really is key by the sound of it, Nick. And you raise a really interesting point there around the auditing of the model and ensuring that there is some degree of accountability through that. Do you think that AI has the potential to ever be inherently ethical in its own right, or is it only as ethical as the people who design it? How do we stop those human flaws being engineered into the technology and maybe perhaps those issues being captured?
Yeah, I'll give you a straight answer. I think AI is not and cannot be inherently ethical. AI mirrors the values, intentions, the blind spots and biases of all of those people that design, train, and deploy it. So then to make sure that the AI reflects values, the use cases that we as an ethical society would want to see, we have to make sure that the team that building it is diverse and has a range of perspectives. So that means not having a development team that are, for example, we've seen in the past, predominantly white, predominantly male, predominantly of a certain age. And it involves bringing other stakeholders into that or other demographics into those teams. Another interesting thing that I talk about a lot is how in that decision-making process around making it the team more diverse, that doesn't just mean demographics of the here and now. What I mean by that, it means also demographics that represent the environment or represent future generations, those people that can give a voice to people that may not ever be able to have a voice at the here and now in the present. And then just finally, I think also AI can be trained to follow ethical guidelines, can be trained to follow frameworks, but that only comes about from telling it to do that in the first place. If we don't do that, if we omit that, then there is a higher risk that AI becomes unethical.
Yeah, and Nick, I think that's a great point, because actually it then reinforces the need for potentially greater regulation of how we govern AI. And for you, Simon, perhaps unfairly, but what role do you think government should play in regulating AI? And if they have a role, how do they keep up with the fast pace of innovation that we're seeing at the moment?
Yeah, and Tom, I'm coming at this from a slightly different angle because I think the transparency thing I find really interesting, and Nick makes some really good points there. Is the way I think about transparency, though, is we focus a lot around how we make the technology transparent, right? How we make AI, people understand what it's doing. But I think my view is slightly different, is that we should focus really on the outcome and the process and the impact on that consumer or person, and how we make that whole process more transparent. So kind of a pet peeve of mine, right, is kind of insurance, right? So insurance is kind of like a whole black box. So we don't know how they generate premiums. We know they go up. We know they've got their own models already using some elements of AI, machine learning behind them, that are generated based on where you are, where you live, your house, who knows, a number of different factors, whether it's, car or home insurance. We don't know how that data is being used as a consumer. So if we put more AI into that process, is it going to really make any big difference if we don't understand the outcome? So I think if we're going to use more technology, whether that's AI or or otherwise, then we should also look at the whole process across different industries. How do we make those more transparent so we can actually see how organizations are using data and technology, whether that's to generate an insurance premium, or whether that's to decide if someone gets a certain type of healthcare or not, which, if we look at, say, somewhere like the US market and their kind of insurance model, I could see AI being a huge problem of already denying people based on some minute criteria. So coming back to your question, a bit of a long-winded way, but what can government do to help build more transparency is to actually look at, are consumers actually being, and businesses being protected? Is there underlying rights of how organizations are using their data, how they're making decisions about whether they get benefits, whether they get insurance, whether they get healthcare? I think that's where we need regulation. And yes, there does need to be an element of regulating the tech as well, to say, again, it's really about the context. Coming back to that point we had in some of our other podcasts, it's about context. How is AI going to be applied to different types of data in different industries? How is it going to impact on people? And therefore, what should government do to put in place better protections for people and businesses, whether that's from technology or from the bias of humans, which is just still as big a problem as it is with the technology.
So yet again, focusing on the human in this case, in fact, how the human could be potentially misusing the technology, whether consciously or not. And to you, Nick, same question. What do you think around the role that government may play in regulation? Do you think Simon's view needs to go a little bit further, or do you think actually it needs to be a bit self-regulating?
I totally agree with Simon, but I'll add a different perspective and a slightly left field one as well, that puts the responsibility a little bit on the citizen as well. So Sopra Steria, the company I work for, we ran some research with citizens, and we found that a lot of, I can't remember the exact percentage, but the majority of citizens do not trust the government with their use of AI currently, or the use of data for AI machines. However, only a minority of citizens are willing to read the terms and conditions for how their data is used. So that shows a big disparity there between the willingness of citizens to get involved, to understand how government use AI and data, but then they're unwilling to understand how government use AI and data, but they are also unwilling to trust the government. So I think, therefore, it comes back to my earlier point around the way in which the messaging from government is communicated needs to be in a more digestible and understandable way. So just putting everything in terms and conditions with lots of long words, lots of legal words, is not the same as making something transparent. So I think there needs to be regulation around how the AI is used, as Simon was saying, how the AI comes to its decision making, and transparency with regards to that, but also with regards to how the government communicate to the citizens how they're using data and how they're using AI. It should be clear, it should be understandable, there should be a low reading age. So yeah, I definitely agree with Simon, but I think that regulation could go one step further with regards to the messaging of AI to make that ethical in itself as well.
Okay, so great to have you both in agreement on that one, because it is quite a difficult question actually in terms of the whether you get regulatory overreach, whether you get under regulation. There is a very fine balance to be struck there, I think, and it's a global challenge, because I think, Simon, as you potentially mentioned, I was reading just this week actually about medical cases in the US being rejected by insurers. And it was felt that the upsurge in rejections was as a result of the implementation of AI, which it is effectively potentially going to cause significant challenge to the end user of that service, i.e. a sick individual. So again, human consequences of the implementation potentially of technology, rightly or wrongly. And a lot of concern at the moment, and I think, Nick, you touched on this at the very start, is around bias in AI and the potential for that. And it's almost a reflection of potential bias that's inherent in humans or in society. But Nick, I'd love your view on how we might be able to tackle that in the technology profession.
So structural changes must be made to prevent future harm. So there needs to be more regulatory standards, better testing on diverse populations, as well as better oversight in general. In the absence of these, responsibility will fall to individual organizations. And then those organizations, even if they have the correct governance in place, there may be unexpected or unintended consequences of the use of AI. And in an ideal world, AI that causes disproportionate harm would no longer exist. But in case problems continue, there should be clear recourse mechanisms for individuals to challenge unfair decision making. Also, as soon as a situation which disproportionately harms marginalized communities, it should be an individual should have the ability to raise that and identify that and speak to the organization, and the organization should instantly take that piece of technology or AI offline for a review. Again, coming back to that audit perspective, if there is that case, then there should be an audit to find out how the decision, how the AI came to that decision. And then ultimately there should be a stick, right? There should be consequences for organizations that deploy harmful AI systems. We are starting to see that with regulation. Whether that's strong enough and enough of a deterrent, I think is a conversation for a different day. But there needs to be a strong enough stick to make people stand up, or make organizations stand up and take notice of this and make sure that they are taking these issues seriously.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. I would agree with that, and certainly, Simon, I'd welcome your view in terms of what's happening around redress, around some of that potential bias. Is that something you're seeing from the platform providers or from the SIs out there? Are we seeing much of that addressing those challenges?
I think, Tom, it's still really early days. Really early days, I should say, for AI ethics. I think when we look at things like the EU AI Act, they've taken a much more comprehensive and view of how to regulate AI. And I think, obviously in the UK, we've taken a much softer approach, kind of deregulating and that responsibility out to some of the individual kind of departments and government bodies. I think there is there's some really good bits about like the EU AI Act where they're identifying these kind of high risk use cases. And while I wouldn't necessarily wholly adopt it, I think there's some great examples there where actually looking at specific use cases and saying, should we limit adoption of AI in these? The question is how we do that, of course, with kind of the pace of innovation that we're going through. We can't wait 2 years to put an individual bit of legislation through. So kind of coming back to Nick's point, there is a lot of onus and responsibility on organizations to have to take responsibility for how they actually implement AI, kind of building those ethical frameworks up front. But I don't think it's not an easy kind of task for them. So I think this is area we're going to continue to see kind of develop over the coming years. But I think from an organization perspective, there's this rapid need to implement AI to get that business benefit. I think in the long run, there's some much bigger kind of societal challenges as well that we will have to tackle when it comes to AI. And there's still some really areas of the market that have some real weakness in them. We have like GDPR, for example, which is a fantastic regulation and protecting, but there's still big holes. Things like deepfakes, for example, is really just a wild west at the moment. Still, there's a lot of AI misinformation as well, and again, there's not a lot of focus on really punishing organizations for that at the minute. It's starting to be some focus on trying to put pressure on big tech, but I think it's difficult, to always do that.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, actually, Simon, and certainly that data security and potential invasion of privacy is another serious concern that many individuals have, and things like GDPR obviously provide a great deal of comfort around that and control. But I guess, Nick, in this AI world that we're inhabiting, as Simon pointed out, those deep fakes or even the rapid deployment of AI for some of the security threats that we've seen out there is a real challenge. I mean, how do companies and government actually balance the benefits of AI, but at the same time address some of those challenges?
It's a very good question. I think to be able to balance the value of AI, while also making sure that we deploy it in an ethical way, I do think there needs to be a greater understanding by everyone as to what AI actually is. I think people get caught up in ChatGPT, deep fakes, and think of AI as this super intelligent piece of technology that we will never be able to understand. And therefore, I think there a lot of work to help educate the masses as to how data is being used, how your data is being used, what AI actually is, could lead to an environment where people are more willing to engage with the ethical side, but also more willing to accept the value that it can bring. So I think we can find that balance through a level of education to all stakeholders around data, around ethics, around AI, around all of the key things that we've spoken today.
And Simon, have you anything you would add to that?
I think, there's, when we look at kind of how AI is being implemented right now, as we talked on some of our other podcasts, it's really, we're at that layer where it's really about just augmenting people's jobs, right? It's about knowledge management. It's about, chatbots. And, there are some ethical considerations in some of those areas, like, should you decide if you're talking to a chatbot or not? Should we inform people about that? Does it really make a huge difference to that conversation if it's improving the customer experience? I don't think it's a yes or no answer on that, by the way. It's a debate of how much we should inform people about what is AI generated, where AI is involved in different other technologies like conversational chatbots or agents that may sound human. And I guess it's this trade-off, right? In our kind of personal lives as consumers as well. The more data we give to these AI models, right, the better they're going to be. The better they will be for personal assistance, for being able to personalize our calendars. And I think what we've seen over the past decade or so of us giving more and more data to big tech companies to enable our smartphone apps to be better, to enable our cloud services to be better. I think it shows a trend that people are happier for that trade-off. They're happy to give more data to get better service. I think it is going to be the role of largely government and organizations to try and protect the consumers to a degree, because there's only so much we're going to be able to inform them about exactly what AI is. As kind of Nick said, we should try and simplify language as much as we can, but there comes a certain point where there needs to be some broader regulation like GDPR to protect people. And it's all comes back to that point, like our other podcast, Tom. It's all about data, right? At the end of the day, it all comes down to how do we protect people's personal data, whether that is medical, financial, personal information. that's really the core of it. I think there are some bigger ethical considerations, things like should we use AI in defense and so forth, but they're largely, by and large, much bigger questions that your average sort of daily user is not going to be too worried about. So I think it all comes back to data at the end of the day. How do we protect people as they give more information, as organizations open up the data they have to apply AI to it? How do we ensure that delivers a better customer experience, helps businesses to reduce their cost and be more efficient, but does it in a way that is ethical, that is fair, that is transparent? And kind of coming back to my point earlier, how do we, focusing on the people at the end of the day, how do we ensure that they're being treated fairly, whether that is using AI or otherwise?
And yes, I completely agree, Simon. And I think, Nick, that sounds like that would be a response that would fit very well with your own thinking. Is that correct? Or
yeah, I think I'll just double down on Simon's point. I think I also spoke earlier about the need for education, but I do think at the end of the day it comes down to having clear legal frameworks that regulate the use of AI in these particular contexts. So in terms of the use of security and the potential invasion of privacy, I would like to point out that as in the past as a society, we have defined legal frameworks for war crimes. We have defined legal frameworks for the use of medical research and testing. There is no reason why we cannot do this with AI as well. I do think that some people, or as a society, as I said earlier, we tend to think of AI as a super complex and something that is we're never going to be able to overcome in terms of some of the ethical issues of it. But as I said, look at what we did with the Geneva Convention and defining war crimes and then defining the medical ethics. We've done it before and we can do it in this context as well. And we really do need those legal frameworks in place.
A fantastic point, Nick. And I think a great one to end this podcast on, actually, which is a bit of a call to action for all of those involved to make sure that we're focusing on the human and doing the right thing, I guess, as we implement these solutions across government and industry. And for those of you who have picked up on the particular theme of data in today's conversation, I would point you to the specific Sopra Steria Insights session on AI data, which forms part of this series, where we explore that topic in depth. So Simon, Nick, thank you very much both for your conversation and for your input today. For those of you listening, please hit subscribe if you'd like to hear more of the Sopra Steria Insights sessions, in particular the AI series of which this is a part. So thank you very much, both Simon and Nick.
Great, thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Simon.